Good morning. Bienvenue. Welcome to the launch of the Philippine Elections 2022 International Observers Mission, sponsored by the International Coalition for Human Rights in the Philippines and Kontra Daya initiative in the Philippines. I especially acknowledge the media workers joining us today, and I'd invite you to indicate your position along with your name, so we know who you are. My name is the Reverend Patricia Lisson, and I'm the Chairperson of ICHRP Canada and a member of ICHRP Global Council. And I am speaking to you from the unceded lands of the Abenaki people on Turtle Island, better known as Canada. The Abenaki peoples have been affected by the colonial rule who took away land and destroyed their cultures. Today, we have three speakers explaining why we have undertaken this initiative in this adverse situation of a world pandemic. Each will present for about 3 minutes, and then we will have a question and answer session with the media and, if possible, with other participants. Please put your questions in the Q&A or raise your hand, and I will acknowledge your hand and ask you to present your question for the panelists to answer. The whole event will take about 30 minutes or so, and we are free to extend depending on the flow of questions and the interest. The International Coalition for Human Rights in the Philippines, ICHRP, was founded in 2013. It is a global network of organizations and institutions concerned about the human rights situation in the Philippines and committed to campaigning for just and lasting peace in the country. It aims to inform the international community about today's grave human rights situation in the Philippines. ICHRP Global was a key member of Investigate PH, which created a series of 3 reports focusing on the human rights situation in the Philippines. Also, Investigate PH reports demonstrate the domestic remedies to address human rights abuses under the Duterte government are inadequate. And the regime has actively orchestrated such rights violations through a range of state institutions. This international election observer mission was a recommendation of Investigate PH's 3rd and final report last September 2021. We want it to provide independent monitoring of the Philippine elections from the start of the campaign period this month of February up to May 9th, voting day, and subsequent counting and declarations results. The IOM will provide independent monitoring in the Philippine elections from the start of the campaign until the end, which will be June. The need for this monitoring campaign is clear in the context of the worsening human rights situation under the Duterte government, and given the widespread corruption and violence present in the past Philippine elections. The purpose of the launch is to generate media attention, provide justification for the need for the IOM, and to bring the attention to IOM volunteers and participants, and to express solidarity with the Filipino people. Today, our speakers are Professor Arao from Kontra Daya in the Philippines, and the Reverend Dr. Chris Ferguson, a commissioner of Investigate PH. After we have seen this short video, I will then introduce our speakers in sequence. Let us watch this video. Thank you for the volunteers who created that video, which captures very succinctly the key issues that we're addressing here today, and that what we hoped that our IOM will help to support as well. Our first speaker this morning is Danny Arao. He is a professor, associate professor in the Department of Journalism at the University of the Philippines College of Mass Communications in Diliman, Quezon City. He is speaking today as a member of Kontra, Daya, a Philippine-based election watchdog organization. Welcome to you, Danny.
Yeah, thank you, Patricia. And good morning to all of you, or good afternoon, wherever you may be. It's a little past midnight here in the Philippines. Believe it or not, many activists are awake at this time. It's not because they're hopelessly nocturnal, far from it. It's mainly because warrantless arrests and detention can happen at around 2 or 3 in the morning. If no one knocks at their door, perhaps they can sleep soundly. This has been experienced by many of my friends in the progressive movement, some of them still languishing in jail as we speak. As mentioned by our friends from ICHRP, the elections shall happen amid rampant human rights violations. Many countries in the world have 4 seasons. Here in the Philippines, the running joke is that we have 3 seasons: the wet season, the dry season, and the election season. Today, February 8th, marks day 1 of the campaign season for the presidential, vice presidential, senatorial, and party list elections. That we are holding the launch of the International Observer Mission now shows that our concern is not just election day itself, but also what happens before and shortly after. Just to provide some context, the elections that will happen on May 9 is the 5th automated elections in the Philippines and the first to be held under the global pandemic. Whether or not we will have clean and honest elections is uncertain, given various problems that our limited time may not be able to cover. Suffice it to say that the 2022 elections in the Philippines are important in defending whatever remains of our democracy. For our colleagues who have monitored developments in the Philippines, tyranny and impunity have become a new normal under the Duterte administration. The campaign period starts today, but many candidates and political parties have engaged in early campaigning and vote buying, and we expect the elections to be more of the same, as money politics and the domination of political clans remain the order of the day. And lest we forget, we have to face election-related violence, including red tagging and extrajudicial killings of supporters and candidates. The International Observer Mission is much appreciated because it brings worldwide attention to what we are going through right now as we try to battle state-sponsored repression and maximize whatever limited opportunities there may be in the upcoming national and local elections. On a related note, let me end by saying that yesterday, February 7, marked the second year of detention of Miss Frenchie May Cumpio, a journalist known for her critical reports on the Duterte administration, who ended up being accused of having ties with the Communist Party. As various groups call for her release, may we all remember the importance of our work in the international community as we all fight for our common goals of genuine democracy. Thank you for your attention. That's all I have to say. Mabuhay po tayong lahat. Long live the progressive movement. Thank you.
Thank you, Danny, for that introduction to the issues and expressing your views and describing it so well. Our second speaker this morning is the Reverend Dr. Chris Ferguson. who is currently the International Professor of Reformed Universities in Columbia. He also was the former General Secretary of the World Communion of Reformed Churches and a High Commissioner for Investigate PH. And so I turn the floor over to you, Chris. Chris, you're still muted.
Thank you, and greetings to all. Again, I'm also speaking from Seoul, South Korea, and very aware of the power of the witness of Professor Danny points to really the findings of the Investigate PH report in 3 parts. This report, first of all, called for an independent investigation after the report of the High Commissioner revealed that the so-called war on drugs was in fact unbridled atrocities against the people and in systemic violation of human rights, calling for a full independent investigation, which the United Nations failed to do. Investigation PH therefore launched such an investigation and made it very clear through studying over 50 emblematic cases that there is no capacity or will for the Filipino government and its agencies to provide internal remedies for human rights abuses, and in fact established through this independent investigation the truth that it isn't the failure of the Filipino state to defend and protect the human rights of its own people, but in fact the Filipino state is the primary agent of the violation of the political and civil rights of the people. A second report then came to provide a framework focusing very strongly on the 3 wars as a concept of understanding how the political and economic project of the Duterte government applied the justification, first of all, of the poorly named war on drugs as a pretext for the assault on the poor, robbing people of their land, and using state repression to chill and through extrajudicial assassinations and through trumped up charges and so on. The second focus of war, which is very pertinent in this deteriorating situation today, is that extending the concept of the war on terror and supposedly the call to end so-called local communist armed conflict, use the justification of the threat of terrorism as justification for ending all dissent. Political opponents, journalists, particularly religious actors and so on, to the extent that through red tagging and trumped up charges, extrajudicial assassinations, the techniques used of oppression in the war on drugs was applied, therefore, to this war on dissent. It really meant that anybody that raised their voice against the current government and its policies then became the victims of repression, to the extent we actually believe that we could now say that for many, the freedom of religion, for instance, has been violated by so many religious actors who simply were persecuted and are red tagged, thrown in jail, and in some cases losing their lives and certainly their freedoms simply in the defense of other people. The more the poor are defended, the more their defenders are attacked, including journalists, trade unionists, and so on. In this situation, we also see the war on the moral people, including extending deeply into the area of international crimes, war crimes and crimes against humanity, where now in the pretext of the international war on terror, you see territorial assaults and militarized attacks on people in order to bring the Philippine domestic policies in line with U.S. foreign policy objectives. The third report put all of this in the context of not only political and civil rights that are violated, but the deeper social, economic, and cultural rights. And the report made it very clear that the neoliberal policies of the government has deepened poverty. 50% of Filipinos living in poverty, and has denied the right to livelihood to people. The military response to the COVID epidemic made this deepening poverty even worse. And we see the violations of the rights of the child, the rights of indigenous people, the already mentioned freedom of religion, all as part of this attack on the rights of the poor. And we very pertinent, and I end with this in the point is that mechanisms were also created to be clear. The Anti-Terrorism Act and the National Task Force to End Communist Local Armed Conflict are actually now mechanisms of the state that are created to perfect this war against dissent. So there could not be a more chilling atmosphere with more systemic human rights abuses and a deteriorating situation in which the prerogative of people to freely express themselves and gather to participate in the electoral process is already at risk. An incredible chill factor where the mechanisms and the institutions of the government and the agencies, the atmosphere is built against the freedom of expression of people and their democratic prerogatives. So the international observer mission is essential in order to not defraud those who bravely have stood up to expose the systematic extent of these three wars and the consequences of human rights violations in this context. So the Investigate PH reports make it very, very clear that there's a situation of human rights abuses to be addressed, and moreover, that those very abuses create a situation that is antithetical to free and fair elections. So we have to redouble our efforts to assure that people have the right to exercise their franchise.
Thank you, Chris, for making that up. The connection between the Investigate PH reports and the next step moving into the IOM. And thank you, Danny, again, for your words and partnering with us, with ICHRP, to lead us and guide us as we mount this campaign. We open the floor now to questions. And I would encourage people to raise their hand because it's a little easier on my part to see your hand quicker than to read the chat, but also questions could be put in the chat. And so if there are questions, we would entertain them at this time. As we're waiting for a question, maybe Danny, you could just give us a little thumbnail sketch of how the monitors would report back, how that would
Okay. From what I've heard during the separate launch in Asia, I think, was it Chris? No. Sorry, it was Peter who said that the monitoring team will be giving updates every 2 weeks, starting now, I suppose, based on the information that they get on the ground. I'm sorry if we cannot provide specifics as to where exactly the team will be going, because right now, given the uncertainty of the pandemic, we still need to treat everything on a case-to-case basis. our priority actually would be the hotspots, the so-called election hotspots where there would be a lot of fraud or even election violence that's going on. But we need to also take into consideration not just the health situation in the area, especially with regard to the COVID-19 pandemic, but also the security situation. Just for the record, we have chapters in some places in the Philippines that would help us out, but we need to take their advice. We defer to their better judgment since they are the ones living there as regards where exactly we will be going. So we will be providing more information as soon as we get them on the ground. Thank you.
Thank you, Danny. I'm waiting for some questions. If people have a question that they would like to ask either Danny or Chris about this, the IOM mission. We wait for just another point that might be, maybe Chris or Danny could give us a thumbnail sketch maybe of what an observer would be doing on the ground in the Philippines.
Basically, that would be field research if you want to be a little bit academic about it. Field research in the sense that you'll be gathering information, you'll try to observe what's happening, and then, well, the advantage in the Philippines is that, many people understand the English language. So if interviews may be conducted subject to certain protocols like physical distancing and wearing of masks, we would strongly encourage our foreign observers to also, interview people on the ground, especially the voters, some politicians, if they are interested to talk to us. So, those things will be done by the observers. So basically, it will be data gathering toward providing, more detailed observations on the ground. By the way, on a related note, Kontra Daya has a strong partnership with the Philippine media. So we also hope, we've encouraged our friends in the media to also interview, selected foreign observers. So they will be making also their own share. They will be having their own share of media appearances. And I think this is very, very important to provide a fresh perspective on what's happening on the ground. That's all. Thank you.
Thank you. There's a question here on, if I can get back to the first question, how does one join the observation team if you're in the US? And I think there'll be information, there's an answer in the chat as well. If somebody, there will be information for the IOM for people in the US on February the 15th, and that's given by Drew. I don't know if Drew, are you on? Do you want to speak to that? If you're, open your mic and speak to that, Drew. Drew is the Secretariat General of ICHRP in the US.
Hi, yeah, thank you so much for that question. I know on the US end, and I think globally as well, we understand there's like a lot of questions about like details and like how to sign up and so on and what this would look like. And again, from the US, we're gonna be hosting a information session on Feb 15 as well as March 3rd to give information on more of the logistics and details of this.
Thank you, Drew. That's really helpful. Another question about how does one join? How does one join if based in the UK? And again, I can't answer that directly, but I would suspect the your local chapter of ICHRP UK could offer you guidance on that, or you could email us at ICHRP Canada or ICHRP Global, and we could answer that question for you. Unless there's somebody else on the call that has specific answer to that. I'm not in the UK, so I'm not sure what how that is going to play out for them. The other question here, do you expect from Derek Duncan in the US, do you expect some resistance from authorities to the presence of observers?
Okay. It's a little bit hard to answer that with a categorical yes or no. because right now there is a semblance of democracy in the country, but it's just a semblance. For example, right now I can freely talk to you. No one's pointing a gun to my head, literally or figuratively. But I don't know what's gonna happen tomorrow or a few days after. I myself have been red tagged in the past. I've been accused of being part of the movement to oust the sitting president. Just the usual things that activists go through, and journalists as well. So resistance from authorities with regard to the presence of observers can happen, given that the Duterte administration does not want to subject itself to the International Criminal Court, and would, say unpleasant words against, for example, the European Union, whenever the European Union would bring the attention to human rights in having conversations with the Philippine government. But what I can tell you is that if you want to be specific about fact-finding missions at the international level, sometimes there are questions being raised by state forces like the police and the military. They can irritate us somehow whenever we're on the ground, but you can be assured that you will be properly guided by many of our cause-oriented groups. We more or less know how to deal with the kind of repressive government that we have. So there will be some guidance if ever you feel that. Is this very dangerous work? Of course, there's always the element of danger, but we will try our best, of course, to protect you, and we will help each other out. Thank you.
Thank you, Danny. There's a question from Steve Gillard. Are international observers able to enter the country and participate?
Okay. From our experience, well, in the past, fact-finding missions, not really related to elections, but within the general purview of human rights, many of the observers have been allowed entry to the Philippines. So there's not much problem with that. We've had problems, however, with foreigners who've been here for quite a long time. I'm sure you've heard of the travails of Sister Patricia Fox, who's Australian. So she's been here for quite a long time, and then her visa got canceled because of her ties with many progressive groups. So she was practically expelled from the Philippines. But for temporary visits, we should not encounter any problem. But again, this is a caveat because the Duterte administration has become very, very, unstable and unpredictable. So there's no guarantee 100% that there will not be any problems. But for the most part, the past missions have been allowed entry. Yeah.
Thank you, Danny. Beth, you have your hand up. Sorry, I didn't see that note, and I can't see your hand up. So do you have a question you would like to share, Beth?
Patricia, Beth just mentioned in the chat she's having some trouble with Zoom and it's automatically raising her hand. So she doesn't actually have a question.
Oh, she doesn't have a question. Okay, thanks. Doug, just to add a quick note about the UK, ICHRP will ensure that UK ICHRP has the required information for the person who asked the question from the UK. There's another question here from Stuart Howard. What time commitment is required from mission members? These are all very specific questions, but I think they're important.
Okay. Well, in terms of time commitment, we hope that you would consider spending, some time here. It's hard to tell if it's a 9 to 5 thing or because it depends on the situation on the ground. Okay, so how do we handle that? Okay, so it's possible. Okay, Okay, I now have an answer. So it's possible that certain foreign observers would be interested to go out of town. So maybe you would stay there for 2 days or 3 days and then come back to Manila to file the report. So it can work that way. So it's not as if you will be required to work 24/7 without any time for rest. When we more or less have a clear timetable, there will be time, of course, for personal recreation. I'm not sure if that's the direction of your question.
I think the
Yes, go ahead.
question,
Sorry.
Professor, is more, would it be a week commitment, a 10-day commitment, so on, for people coming from outside of the Philippines?
Okay. Yeah. Okay. Yeah. Depending on the coordination with ICHRP, you don't need to stay here for the long haul because, for all intents and purposes, what we plan to have in the international observer mission is to start observing during the campaign period, which starts tomorrow, and then end by the time that there is a proclamation of the winner. So election day is May 9, and then the proclamation will be after a week, so that would be May 16. So you're not expected to be here from February 8 to May 16. It depends on the observer as to what interests you to stay. So basically, it all boils down to your personal commitment as to how much time you would want to provide for this work. Yeah, I hope I answered.
I would imagine probably to give some order to the support and recruitment, and I asked this to Patricia. I imagine there will be the International Observer Mission probably will, though, work in forming teams, and those teams will probably have a unified commitment and will go at different points and come at different points, so they can come and go in an orderly way. Perhaps that's usually often the experience. I also see several questions, Patricia, about usually there will be an international framework about an observer from regional organizations, the UN, the EU, and so on. So I imagine that more details will be coming, but I imagine that this international observer mission will be also accompanied by other international observer missions, some sponsored by foreign embassies and international multilateral groups like the UN or the United Nations, and groups ranging from the Carter Institute and others often supervise or observe elections. So there will probably also be in the country some kind of a framework of international elections, which, going also to the other questions, doesn't mean that there won't be many attempts by the Filipino governments and authorities to discredit those missions, and that's why I think it's extremely important that we make sure that we're present, because the actual presence of the missions themselves, not only whether we observe, but that these are perceived as observed elections, makes a whole lot of difference. So the stronger, from more sectors and more vigilant the whole international community is, the greater protection is afforded to the Philippine people. But I would hope, and I'm assuming, that the International Observer Mission that we're about will also be looking at identifying other missions of a non-governmental agency for whom there could be with whom there could be collaboration, in order to also assure good overall coverage of various sectors and geographic areas.
Thank you, Chris and Danny, for that. And that's correct. We'll be working in partnership with other folks who are other groups and missions that are happening. I think one way that we described it, or at least we're talking about it, is sort of a three-wave approach: before the elections, the elections, and after the elections. And so the teams would go in maybe in that way, and then compile information outside of the country, obviously, and that's the report. There is a note here saying that the U.S. Embassy Tony Tuhan is saying that the U.S. Embassy is organizing one commission. operation to look at. And so it's interesting to know who's going in and who's not. So we'll be working certainly with our partners as they do.
And maybe, Patricia, if I could say, one of the things that you find in the international observer missions for elections worldwide is that different governments have different standards of what constitutes internationally free and fair elections. And groups like the United States, although they claim to look at the overall framework, tend to focus more on the formality of electoral fraud. And whereas I think we're saying that this mission has a much broader understanding of the intimidation factors that are built in before, during, and after, and all the both soft and hard forms of electoral corruption. And so I think it's important to say that this would need to be an observer mission that dealt with the whole context and systemic realities that lead to whether people can really exercise their franchise or not, and so that we, I think, need to be clear that we are not going in to see if those conditions might arise. We're already starting with the premise and the challenge that we know that fundamental expression of dissent is already being repressed. So I think that our observer mission will add something unique to the understanding of the situation, because we have excellent, well-researched information about the already existing degree of repression in the country.
Thank you. That's a very good description, and certainly our focus is on the human rights aspect of all of this, the broader picture, the global picture of all of this. There is a question here about, do you expect more human rights violations in some specific regions? For example, in Mindanao or in the Cordillera, or there's particular sectors of the country that are more dangerous than others?
Okay, thank you for the question. Unfortunately, election-related violence is very much inherent in elections in the past, so it would be more of the same now. And actually, there's a much bigger stake in the elections right now, given the reign of impunity and tyranny that we are going through. So much as we don't want to be called doomsayers, we're preparing actually for the worst. When the Philippine National Police mentions certain areas as election hotspots, our point of view is that the entire country is a hotspot, given the power and influence of political clans. And the irony here in the country is that the poorest regions would have the most powerful political clans. And in order to hold on to their power and influence, they try to repress the people there. I'm sure you've heard of the massacre in Ampatuan in Maguindanao, where we had several people killed, including 32 journalists and media workers. So that's one example of the brazenness of state forces. We hope that nothing will happen again with that magnitude, but of course, the killings are actually happening now. There are already anecdotal evidence of candidates being killed, as well as the continuing extrajudicial killings of activists. So yes, the answer is it's still happening, not just in Mindanao, but also in other areas.
Right, thank you. Yeah. There's a question here from Olivia in Toronto. Will there be an opportunity for observers to focus on specific sectors of people? For example, sending housing activists from Canada to observe how the election impact on the urban poor in the Philippines?
Yeah, we can be a bit flexible to accommodate various aspects, because when we talk about human rights or various forms of election fraud, it cuts across sectors. So if there is a special interest for individual foreign observers to tackle certain aspects, that would be most welcome. On a related note, lest I forget, we are strongly encouraging foreign observers to stay for at least 2 weeks. From our experience, 2 2 weeks would be the desired minimum, because you can only do so much in 1 week and you're not able to properly appreciate everything that's going on. So of course, it's not an absolute requirement, but we are hoping that whoever's interested to join in the International Observers Mission to at least stay for 2 weeks. So I hope it's not too much to ask. Thank you.
I think if one's going all the way there, one wants to stay at least 2 weeks to get a feel, just the time change, at least from North America to the Philippines, at least from where I am. No, I think that's quite reasonable, and to get a feel of what's really happening and a chance to spend some time with the folks on the ground. Just as our time is coming to a close, and maybe Chris, you do have a couple of words you'd like to say in closing?
I think that, thank you. Yes, I think that the mobilization, I think we see this as a long process, and that it is important that in focusing on the elections, we're focusing on the long-term deep struggle for justice, of which the elections providing the opportunity for the people to participate is an important part of the long struggle for social justice. But also to say, at this particular moment, there is throughout the world an attempt to solidify authoritarian regimes, and particularly, I think people will know in this election that the threat of the return of the Marcos dynasty and the understanding of the prolongation through his daughter of Duterte's political clan is a particular threat worldwide, in the sense of combating the rise of authoritarian leadership. So I think there's a global dimension that is imperative, and also there's an opportunity to really follow examples of places like Chile, Bolivia, and Peru, where authoritarian regimes actually were pushed back, and a return to more democratic participation. So there's a lot at stake, simply said, and we have to stand by people in this long-term struggle, of which this election is just one moment.
Thank you. Thank you, Chris. Danny, do you have a couple of words you'd like to just close with?
Well, just briefly, I thank the ICHRP for the opportunity to partner with our group Kontra Daya. For the record, this is the first time that we will be helping out in the International Observer Mission, but nevertheless, we are very, very optimistic that this will be a very, very big boost to the morale of the people working here, because we would be getting fresh perspectives and fresh eyes regarding the fraud that's happening. And the research and the field observations that will be conducted by the groups, we expect a deeper perspective on what's happening, given that I think in the chat room, Mr. Tony Tuhan mentions that there are several members or commissioners of the IOM who are legislators from their respective countries. And I had the pleasure of meeting one of them at the Asian launch a few hours ago. So again, thank you for this opportunity, and we look forward to achieving our common goal of attaining clean and honest elections and the restoration of genuine democracy in our country, and the defeat of tyranny and impunity. Thank you.
Thank you, Tom. Thank you, Danny. I just wanted to say that for the questions that we weren't able to answer because of time, will be addressed either by Global ICHRP or other folks. Drew Miller's on the line, and he's been answering some questions, and I wanted to shout out to Drew and thank him for his support. He's the Secretary General of ICHRP US, and in doing a tremendous piece of work in the US, pulling this together. So thank you, Drew, for being being a part of the webinar and picking up to being able to answer some of the specific questions coming around the ICHRP US issues. And thank you to the other folk in the chat who are answering questions madly as we bring this launch to a close. So I just would like to thank our speakers, the tech team, the Secretariat in Canada, those who spoke this morning, asked questions, those who participated in today's launch for the International Observers Mission. Thank you. It's been a great time, and this is all done by volunteers, and so there's a lot of passionate and committed people ensuring that these messages get out and that work gets done. So in that, let's do our part in upholding the Filipinos' right to a free and fair election in 2022. Thank you all. And I just asked some people to stay online. We take a picture for the thing. So thank you very much. Good day.